But let's talk about roots. You came from Huntsville, Ontario.
So first of all, I get to be the creamy filling between those crispy wafers that are early before. He solved the financial crisis. Sarbanes-Oxley, now we know who to blame. That's good information. And by the way, this is a great organization. Nice to be in front of everybody and a great cause. So thanks for being here. You know, I grew up in Huntsville, Ontario. My dad's 91 years old. He's here tonight. He came, I hope he probably can't hear a whole hell of a lot, so he may be safe. And I've been there. Our family came from 6 generations in that area. And what's fun is my grandfather, at the turn of the century, started a little lumber company. And I think he had 2 employees, and I think he grew it to be the largest hardwood flooring manufacturing company in the world, to the best of my belief and my knowledge. And he was a great mentor to my brothers and my father and our family. And what he taught me from his lumber business was a lot about life and a lot about real estate and how to look at things. And his philosophy was, cycles are cycles. He lived to 93 years of age. He'd always coach us. And he said, cycles are cycles. Get used to it. As soon as it looks too good to be true, it is. And as soon as it looks terrible, load your gun. And for about 50 years, he employed 550 to 650 people. He never went to 2 shifts. He just fundamentally believed, I don't want to wear out the equipment, and I don't want to wear out my people, and I don't want to fire people, because we were a big part of that community. And he said his salespeople would quit in the good times. And in the bad times, he would stockpile timber to the heavens, and people thought he was crazy. And he always met payroll, and his business was fluid and supplied lumber to 45 people in the world. So it was all about cycles. And what was interesting, and many of you will get this, when he sold his company, he kept about 20,000 acres of land and about 20 miles of shoreline in that area that didn't seem to be worth much in the early 60s. He said, I'll keep that, I think it's going to be worth something. And you fast forward, like many families, when he died, his money he found a way out of his pocket, his real estate sustained. And without putting it this way, he always used to say, money's worth more today than it is tomorrow, which is why we discount cash flows. And real estate's worth more tomorrow than it is today, which is why you want to get your money out of this pocket and get it into real estate. And multi-generationally, that will make sense to you. So he taught me many lessons. My dad took a bunch of his land, and I think in small towns you have to be a better business person than in big cities because you need about 5 ways to win. And, it's just tougher. And so Dad had a road building business. He developed land. He had an aggregate business. And the lessons he shared with me, the biggest one is finishative. My dad, his favorite line, all the grandkids associate him with this line, is just everybody has initiative. It's easy to get things started. And the difference between winners and losers is finishative. And so if you can teach your kids anything, you get started at something, you finish it. My daughter was water skiing last summer. Didn't get up the first 3 times. My dad's driving the boat. He still water skis, by the way, at 91. And he looked at her and she goes, I know, finishative. I'll get out of the goddamn water. She said, I'm coming. So those are some of the lessons. The other thing I was thinking about, and many of you can relate to this too, Dad always told us as kids, and we were never a wealthy family by the standards in this room or Toronto standards, but in our hometown, everybody who had an idea came to our family for a little bit of money. And my dad always said, here's the lesson. He said, you're not allowed to back an individual with an idea. It'll ruin relationships. He said, when your friends come in and they want your money, just say, good ideas, most of them don't make money, and individuals can get hit by a beer truck, so don't back an individual with an idea, which has been really good discipline for our family. He said, now if you get share certificates and you got 5 years of earnings history, and if somebody gets hit by a beer truck, there's an organization behind them, then you can part with your hard-earned money. You'll probably be wrong, but you can part with your hard-earned money. And those are many of the lessons from small-town life and that I've carried with me, and I think have been very useful to me in the real estate business.
It's incredible. It's an amazing story, and if you want to talk about those lessons of entrepreneurship and the values you create, under your watch, Oxford has grown from 16 billion in assets to over 50 billion in assets. Why don't you walk us through that journey?
So I got lucky. John talks about the lessons of timing, and you can get lucky. So for many years, I ran C.B. Richard Ellis I bought into it as a young person. I was the CEO for a bit over a decade. And we built a pretty big company here in Canada. We sold it to an American company, and then I ran Latin America and Mexico for years for them. And I retired from there and went down when the markets melted down in '08 and raised about $3 billion with a great friend who also, I think I'm the only one in the room that didn't work for John, a good friend of mine, Mark McGoldrick, who was my best friend at Columbia Business School. We started a fund for $3 billion, raised it to buy stuff cheap. If you ever want, just for fun, you could Google Mark McGoldrick. His last year at Goldman, he was paid $92 million. So I think he was the highest paid guy in Goldman history. When we met together at graduate school in New York the first day, I used to have to spot him a couple $100 a month because he was always underwater. And our net worths passed each other at about 80 miles an hour when we were 35 years old. But we talked for years, and so we set up a fund, and we're investing in things cheap. And Oxford came along and said, any chance you come back to Canada, any chance you run the business. It was difficult extracting myself, but I'm so blessed to have come home. So I took a $16 billion company, as you suggested, and we were 98% domestic. And like a lot of these funds in this part of the world, you kind of run out of Canada at some point and you got to diversify. And Hal Jackman, who many of you know, I've been on one of their boards for years, and his early line to me was, if you want to get rich, put all your chips on one square, and if you want to stay rich, diversify. So our whole program, I sat down with the board, I said, okay, we got to diversify. So the last 7 years, we've grown at 24% a year for 7 straight years. We've gone from 90-some-odd% domestic to roughly 50% Canada. And we've grown, I think our average returns have been 13% over that period of time. So, and we have the business costs about $200 million to run, but we bring in third parties. So the third party fees offset our G&A. So when I go to the board, I say basically it costs me $10 million to run a $47 billion company today that's growing at a greater than 20% rate, that's generated about 13%, and the board go, how much money do you need? So we've been very supported by owners, and luckily the markets have been terrific. And to your point, when I came back in 2010, it just felt, I'd been living in New York and I'd been spending time in London, it just felt like we should load our gun for New York, for London, for the biggest capitals in the world, because they just felt cheap. And so the timing was impeccable for us and impeccable for me to be asked. And I've got an incredible team, and it's actually a pretty amazing story. I think Oxford last year, was the 17th most profitable company in Canada, which is unusual for a little real estate company to be in that space. And huge credit to the team, huge credit to owners for backing us, and I have fun every day.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You look at return. What's making up most of that return from an income yield, capital appreciation, and when you're deploying your strategy with respect to going into new markets, Cheese Grater, by the way, fantastic project, Hudson Yards, another one. Walk us a little bit through your thinking and how you approach maintaining those returns over longer term.
So all of you who have some piece of your business in real estate, you'll kind of get it. It's, I think probably if you look long term, the breakdown between income and capital, total return, has typically been 6 to 7% income and 3% total return. In recent years, because we've been investing in markets where the timing has been terrific, as we improve the portfolio, your income yield comes down closer to something like 5, and fortunately our capital appreciation has been at historical highs. So that's been the lion's share of the 13 has been capital. And fortunately we have a development capability that not every pension fund has. So most pension funds don't have a platform, and we have the ability to invest in our own business. So we put out at any given time, we have 22 projects, we have $5 billion of capital deployed in development, and that's been generating 150 to 200 basis points of additional return. So if I'm one of the other pension funds without that ability, I forego that amount, and that's been a huge driver towards the 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little bit about Hudson Yard project. It's largest.
We have a picture, I think,
Do you
of
have it,
Hudson
Mark?
Yards, if we
Can we
throw
get it up on
Yeah.
screen?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about it's the largest project in the world, I believe, right now. You have a partnership with Stephen Ross's company here, and maybe a little bit on your view on the condo market and what do you guys vision happening here?
So Hudson Yards is a pretty amazing story. So I came in, I arrived in 2010. We needed to get out there into the world and get known. And the trick to get known is go and place a major bet in a major city, and all of a sudden you get some attention. And what had happened was Jay Cross, who many of you may know, was a Canadian. He's had a pretty amazing career. He was the president of Miami Heat. He was the president of New York Jets. He's been a serial developer. He was asked to be the CEO of the Hudson Yards project, and Steve Ross, who was a good friend of Bloomberg, negotiated a deal to take over 26 acres of the island of Manhattan that was a rail yards. And if the picture can go up, it might be helpful again. Just leave it up for a little bit. And these rail yards, the truth is there's no land left on that island. And these 26 acres, if you had the courage to develop over the rail lands, all of a sudden became pretty nice territory to mine. And so Jay called me, said, you should be in New York. We need a financial backer. Bloomberg won't sign this deal without us having a partner. So we had pretty good negotiating power with Related. So we said, we're not an LP investor. If we're going to do it, let's be true partners. So we signed a GP agreement with them where we're 50 and they're 50. And then we embarked upon this amazing story. And if you go to your board and say, there's a $20 billion project and we're taking a half interest and I've been here 6 months, you don't get that much of a positive bit of feedback. And so what happened was it was purely a land play. We looked at it and we said, the average office stock in Manhattan is 72 years old. By spending $1.2 billion to build a platform on the east and another 1.2 on the west, you unlock land that'll be roughly $250 a foot on an island where most land is $750 a foot. So it was, with all the complexity, most complex project you've ever seen, it came down to a simple land play. I can get land at a third what market may be, and the dirty little secret in life is people want new, and the office stock on that island is old, and so we had an opportunity to do something pretty amazing. And so underway today is $12 billion of activity. And we're so in the chips, it's been a crazy good run for us. And it took courage in the beginning, and the good news is the office stock has been snapped up. The retail's a little slower for many reasons. We're happy to talk about them. And so far in this complex, only one of the towers is residential. And so far, so good. It's trading at about $3,100 a foot. We've sold out 50% of the stock. For fun, if you're there, and sincere offer, if you walk the High Line and you want a tour, because there are people that are there 24/7 doing this stuff, there's a $24 million marketing booth, which is, and I take no credit or blame for it, but it's unbelievable just to go and look at the site and look at the product. And so far so good. But it's been an amazing story. It's complex, and like anything in life, you break it into units. So every single phase we brought in a different set of investors because none of us want to put out that kind of equity. Our discipline with our partners is if you put up $1, we put up $1, which helps if your partners are allergic to equity. You can't get into too much trouble, so they don't really like cutting a check, which is fine. And so we've brought in the Kuwaitis, we brought in many Japanese partners, we brought in many American partners, and every discrete phase has a different partnership structure. And it's been an amazing run. And if you are interested genuinely, go down, take a look. It's very humbling for all of us as you look at what's going on down there. And luckily, our timing was really good.
Terrific. Amazing complexities with respect to approvals. Hard to navigate these waters when a project like this at this scale hasn't really been done. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned or the education you received the hard way with respect to your real estate investing.
Well, I mean, the first thing is we are so lucky to be Canadian, and we're so lucky to be in this country, and we're so lucky to do business in this country, and I don't miss living in New York for a second. And so the number one thing when you do business in that town is fortunately we have partners who They did Columbus Circle. They've done, multiple projects that you'd be aware of. They know their way around. If you want stuff done in New York, it's all about leveraging your position, because nobody wants to be nice to you. They're not, and we Canadians are particularly vulnerable because they think we'll start to be nice. And so lesson number one is you need a local partner who's prepared to put up their dukes day in, day out to get anything accomplished in that town, and we happen to have that partner who's been terrific. I think it's like anything. If you can dream on a little scale or you can dream on a big scale. The first project I ever developed was in Huntsville, Ontario. It was an 11,000 square foot courthouse. I was 21 years old, and Dad and I built it. It cost us $1.1 million. We went to the bank. We could finance out $1.2 million, and I learned that you can get value against cost, you can get debt against cost, or value, not cost. And I was like, hold on, real estate's simple. We can get 1.3 million, cost us 1.1. This business is simple. And so, but the same principles that applied to that little building are applying to this massive scale project. And so you just want to try to keep it as simple as you can. You want to not let the complexities get in the way. You want to keep your eye on the big picture like it's a land play. And here's how we have to execute. And those principles have been applied, and that's part of why it's a success today.
So maybe, Blake, you can talk a little bit about your investment philosophy. It seems we're in an era where cap rates keep going down, prices and values keep going up. And I'm just curious, especially in your case, where OMERS is a pension plan that wants to be allocating more and more capital. You have a platform where you can bring in newer and more investors. How do you deal with this influx of cash? And what kind of behavior are you trying to create for the money with respect to real estate?
So today we're probably 16% of OMER's book, and not ideally, they've put a 21% stake in the ground. It says basically if you want as much as 21% of our $100 billion of equity, it's yours. And today we're roughly, I think we're $47 billion. We're sort of 16 of equity. We lever 1-to-1, so that's 32, and then we have partners of about 15 billion. And so theoretically, I have another $5 billion of firepower of equity. Again, levered 1-to-1 is 10, and we often bring in partners. So we probably have $15 billion of firepower for opportunities. And the first thing you have to recognize is you just have to ignore it. And you look for the right opportunities, not just because the money's there. And what we've been able to do is, through diversification, dumb down the risk. We have 188 assets. We're always churning out our old assets, replacing it with the best assets we can find. Our philosophy isn't unlike Buffett, which is I want to buy great assets at a good price, not good assets at a great price, because you'll never get that right. So we've been buying the very best assets in the most liquid markets of the world. We have a very city-state approach, so we don't look at the economy of France or the economy of London. We look at the city center of the UK. We look at the city center of London, 2 blocks. We look at 4 blocks in Paris. We just this week closed on a $1.6 billion acquisition in Berlin. And we're in 4 cities in the United States, and it's very simple. And we like the fundamentals of Boston, Washington, New York, and San Francisco. So if someone calls us and says, are you going to want to do something in Chicago? No. You want to do something in Texas? No. So we're very, very focused on the cities we like, the fundamentals we like, continuing to diversify the portfolio, and picking off the right opportunities, ignoring the fact that there's a lot more capital available, because it's irrelevant unless we have creative opportunities to deploy it.
What's a good cap rate right now?
Depends on your asset class. I mean, office is different than retail, different than they're all different, and they're all you got to be a little more aggressive today than you were yesterday, and money's going the other way. We have our average cost of funds is 3.1% across our $15 to $16 billion in debt. Still an aberration in history. Still crazy low. Still great. And so we use leverage judiciously, and I think it's a better question to ask what returns we're seeking as opposed to cap rates, because that's an isolated measure. But we're consistently getting 8s and 9s in the most liquid markets in the world, and we're being quite disciplined about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Little bit about the residential market in Toronto. I think in the next 5 years, the number of skyscrapers,
Yeah.
defined as 40 stories or more, will double. What's your view on what's happening in this local market?
So we're not, by definition, in the pension fund game in Canada, we don't get into the residential condo business because we're matching assets with long-term liabilities, and the day we start buying stuff to trade, it's sort of inconsistent with our tax-free status. So we're not developers of condo product, unless it's mixed use, and then we'll usually set up a taxable entity in place. So I'm not an expert in that space. I'll say a few things. The reason why you see so many skyscrapers and the condo market hasn't blown up is for 15 or 20 years, roughly 30,000 housing units get built in Toronto. And 10 years ago, 8 or 10,000 was high-rise and the rest was single-family. In the last 10 years, it's been progressively morphing towards 22 to 25% high-rise, very little single-family. So the same housing stock's getting built, even though it doesn't feel like it when we drive in from the airport. And there's a market that meets that demand beautifully. There's 100,000 net migrants to Toronto. They tend to absorb 25 to 30,000 units. The building teams can build out that much without oversupply or driving up construction costs. So that's been a stabilizing influence. And, your fee simple homes on, lots in this city, to me, will only get more valuable because you can't print more of those. You can print more condo product. But I'm not one of those who believe things are going to hell in a handbasket. And I think whatever you see in planning departments, the list of possible projects, common sense prevails. Our banks have been infinitely more disciplined than they were in the early 90s. And so, if I were to bet, would you sooner have a single family home than a condo? I think so. Is it going to blow up? I don't think so.
Okay. Now, when you have this, not pressure, but opportunity to invest more money in the real estate market, you're doing the largest project in the world in New York, you're doing a very big project in London, most of your product in Canada is well positioned. Where do you go next?
So again, very city-state growth. And our book today, so the diversification of the story today is we're 50% office, 25% retail, then 5% a bunch of the other food groups. And so we own Banff Springs, Shadow Lake Louise, Jasper Park Lodge, for example. Anyone wants a holiday, let me know. Tell me. I've got a captive crowd here. I'm the only one not selling anything in this room, I think. And so then as we grow to the cities, elsewhere from Canada, we haven't really gotten into the other food groups. We've been primarily investing in office. So rather than pick other economies that we think we should grow in, we're really trying to deepen our portfolio expertise to go from, in London now we're making some more residential investments. And, we're looking at a few retail opportunities in the United States with all the distress. So we're really trying to take the food groups we have in Canada, overlaying them in the markets we really believe in, and getting deeper that way. I mean, a business plan, as we all learn in business school, is, what am I great at? How do I get in the way of a trend given limited resources? So we've really tried to take what we're great at and not try to think we can outsmart people in some other city. Let's focus on what we are really good at doing. And then how do we get in the way of the best trends in the world by being thoughtful and putting some people in those markets and hopefully getting it wrong for a while before we bid. And we all have limited resources, and we allocate our resources judiciously. Sure. So that's sort of the way it works. And our plan today is to be 20, 20, 20, and 2020. So we'll be a $60 billion business by 2020, which will be $20 billion of equity, $20 billion of debt, $20 billion of third party. We have 2,300 employees. They can all tell you that. We all know exactly where we're going. We know what markets we'll deploy it in. I think that'll make us one of the 10 largest real estate companies in the world. I mean, depending on what you measure, which feels pretty good. I think we should all be proud of that. And then after 2020, we'll take off the governor, and who knows, the sky could be the limit. Yeah.
So we talk about, Oxford essentially started as an arm of a pension plan, and there are many organizations like that. But in your particular case, it doesn't feel like that. Oxford, to me, feels like an independent expert in real estate, one of the top operators that we've ever come across. what is the role of culture and how you build your team, and maybe talk a little bit about the organization and why it acts in such a way.
So I'll say a few things, and I know John Love's in the room, and I mean this so sincerely. The reason why Oxford today is what it is today is, first of all, the pension fund industry in Canada allows pension funds to buy operating companies, which is not true anywhere else in the world. And if you went to Washington, business would get pretty bent out of shape if you started from scratch, if the pension funds woke up and said we're going to start buying Vornado and Boston Properties and the big guns. So elsewhere in the world, it just hasn't been made okay for pension funds to buy operating companies. In Canada, it was, which is why Teachers and Cadillac Fairview are a world-class company, and why Ivanhoe Cambridge, which is owned by the Case, is a world-class company, and why Oxford's been able to do what it's doing. But the truth is, we bought the Love family operating platform. There was a household name in this country with an unbelievable track record, with unbelievable leadership, with an unbelievable story. And, John at one point decided this company probably needs to grow internationally and it's time to sell. And we were fortunate enough to buy it. So we've taken a household name that was incredibly well run, and I give John and his dad all the credit, and tied it to our balance sheet, and that combination is, to me, formidable. And in terms of a go forward, culture's just so important. And you can sit around, in a family office with 3 people and allocate money, and maybe it isn't so important. But in an operating platform, it is essential. And it is one thing that's hard to capture, and you know it. You know bad culture when you see it, and you know good culture when you see it. It starts at the top. People want to be treated fairly. They want authentic leadership. They want people who genuinely mean what they say. They want to be, you can't treat everybody equally, but you can treat them fairly. They want to be part of something that's growing. And they want to be part of something that they're really proud of. And so, I have lots of strengths and weaknesses. The one thing I'm totally focused on is making sure our culture is terrific. I watch our numbers with our customers. I think we have a 92% customer satisfaction today, which is top of its field. I watch my own employee satisfaction. That matters to me. I try to see every single person in our organization always once, hopefully twice a year. And it's critical. And, it's a virtuous circle. I often say, with our troops, I go, listen, if you on this floor, if you're good to the person to the left and you're good to the person to the right, odds are you're going to feel pretty good about the place. And by the way, that infects the rest of the hallway. And all of a sudden, people feel pretty good about that. And then, by the way, when you go down to the next floor, people get along better. And then, by the way, you tend to look after our customers a little better. And by the way, when you look after our customers a little better, I'm happy. And by the way, when I'm happy, because the numbers are there, the board's happy, but it starts with you guys being good to each other. So, no, anybody who says culture doesn't matter doesn't friggin' understand business, in my opinion. And so I hope, and I never take it for granted, but I hope that you hear those things, and I hope you'll hear more of them in the future. Sure.
When you talk about challenges, and it's not just in people, you're running some of the most famous buildings in Canada and the U.S. and in New York. How do you adapt? You're in a post 9/11 era where security all of a sudden becomes a much different priority. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing there.
So when you understand these companies, you're an investor, and so that's what the board cares about, is how much you allocate your equity. But don't ever forget you're a service company, and we're an operating platform that's interfacing. We have 1.5 million interactions every day. And if we aren't on the front line, and we aren't investing in IT, and we aren't listening to our customers, and we aren't paranoid about all the things we should be paranoid, including, business to customer experiences, which you're seeing in retail and increasingly with office, if we aren't focused on those things, we're going to be caught out of step. So we have a relentless focus on for fun, we've set up a $5 million side-by-side fund to assail our business model right now. And we've taken some people from outside of our company to say, okay, challenge us. Tell us what we're doing wrong. WeWork is on the horizon, and WeWork, for most of you would know, is really trying to position itself in the marketplace today as a business to customer offering. And I liken it to, Four Seasons, many years ago when it was asset heavy. You realize maybe I don't have to own these assets. Maybe I can brand myself this way and have a better run being a service entity, and I'll allow some other fossil to carry around the assets. And so we're not going to be that fossil. So we're all students of what's going on in that space. We're all morphing our business to offer that in addition to what we offer our customers. And all of that requires listening to your young people, investing in technology, assailing your own business model, never taking yourself to be, ahead of the curve, questioning everything you do. And all those things are part of our DNA, and I give a lot of credit to the younger generation who push us to the max.
So I have a wife and 3 daughters.
Yeah.
And then you're giving me a segue about thinking what's next, and given you own a big retail portfolio, Amazon's looking at doing another distribution facility. It'll likely be in my driveway. That's how many boxes arrive every day.
Yeah.
So what's your view on how online shopping is going to affect the retail market?
So I'm sure most of you follow, I think Amazon's market cap was up $60 billion on Friday, which is the size of General Motors. So that gives you some indication of where people think that organization's headed. It's very real. And, people underestimate it. In the dot-com days, everybody said, you know what? What's going on is, in the short term, probably not nearly as dramatic as people think, which is true. And in the long term, what's going on when behaviors actually have time to change, it's going to be massively true. And I think you're starting to see 17 years hence that it is massively true, that these trends are very real. So as a retail, we had 30 malls 7 years ago, we have 8. So we have a simple philosophy as it relates to retail, and we just quietly sold off things that we didn't think would be the absolute best in class in the areas they're in. And so we own Yorkdale and Square One and Scarborough Town Centre and Upper Canada Mall, to name a few of them. And it's the retail space today is winner takes all. So if you own Yorkdale, I'm pretty sure Yorkdale is going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
And sometimes in life, God puts a piece of real estate exactly where it should be. It's like Weber's hamburger joint on the way to the cottage. It's just like sometimes they just go, here, this will always work. And that's one of those assets. So we've invested $800 million in the last 5 or 7 years to position it. So it's a winner-take-all business. The other thing is retail's about experience. And so, interacting with your boxes when you're trying to get through your front door isn't much of an experience. But when you want to go and actually get food offerings and do all the things you can't do on. Last time I checked, I don't need it very often. You can't get your hair cut online.
Nope.
You got to go somewhere and do these things, right? And eat and enjoy experiences. So we're very focused on experience, and some of the things that are coming out are unbelievably exciting. We're very focused on investing in the greatest assets that we have, and we're very focused on technology. And we're spending tens of millions of dollars on interactive technology where we can talk to our customers, not just our tenants. And I think it's grossly overestimated the damage you will do to great retail and grossly underestimated what happens to poor retail. You're going to see lots of deadmall.com highlights where assets can't make it. We don't want to be caught in that vortex.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about the trends. It seems to me that infrastructure, retail real estate, residential real estate, even office, it's becoming more, what used to be deemed mixed use is becoming more of the norm. Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see happening there.
Well, I mean, the truth is there's an obscene amount of money chasing hard assets. And you in this room know better than I do how difficult it is to get it right by just deploying capital in the capital markets. And, it's interesting today, the pension fund industry in Canada is, the market cap's $1.2 trillion, and the market cap of the banks and in big insurance companies is $600 million. So the banks, we've all grown up saying pay attention to the banks because they have it all. And the truth is the pension fund world today is 2x the banks. And so that's just in Canada. So you're looking at a massive ambition to allocate to private assets as opposed to capital markets, and this is a global trend. So by definition, you're seeing diversification into infrastructure, into private equity, into non-traditional real estate assets. and you're just going to see it continue, which is why we consistently go in and say, I want the very, very best real estate. And London, you mentioned Leadenhall, and I think I may have a picture of it. It's a good example. We went into London, we weren't well known, so we joint ventured 50-50 with a local public company and said, you know what, we think that this market is ready for a new tower. And we built this tower, and I actually tried to lay off a quarter of our half interest to CPP because I was a little afraid of it. And luckily they turned me down. And so we built this for 500 million pounds. In my mind, it's designed by Sir Richard Rogers at 620,000 square feet. It's one of the most beautiful, office buildings that's ever been put on the planet. And we sold it we opened it on November 15th in 2015 at 92% leased. And we sold it last year, we sold it 3 weeks ago. We went under contract last year for 1.15 billion pounds to an Asian investor. So we built it for 500 million. We just sold it for 1.15 billion. Our profits are $1.06 billion between ourselves and a partner on a single office building that's half the size of First Canadian Place. And so, good example of great real estate, recognizing the trend out there is massive for investment in great hard assets, and getting in front of that trend, and sometimes even your baby, which this was a long-term hold for us, sometimes even that may be for sale at the right price.
So we have time for one last thought. There are many high net worth investors in here. How do they access the real estate market? How do you get involved?
So it's not easy, and I wish I owned our company, and I wish this was a pitch to all of you to load up, because you do okay, I'm pretty sure. The truth is, it's not easy, and the truth is, it's like your own portfolios. I would focus on, for those who don't invest directly in hard assets, I would focus on the very best public companies you can get your hands on. And there are only a few of them in this country, and there are frankly only a few in the United States and only a few in England. Some of them are trading substantially under NAV, and ride them through the cycle. Focus on dividends, sort of compare where they're trading to reasonable cap rates, and if they dip down, by the way, load up instead of bailing, because the best real estate over time is going to stand the test of time. And I didn't mean this to be a plug for John Love, but I don't even get a drink from him usually, but John's in the room. There are a few Canadian private equity companies that are just doing an incredible job, and he's certainly one of them. So there are a few that you can sit down with, get a piece of the action on a diversified basis, as opposed to trying to go buy a triplex and manage it and get your phone calls on Sunday and all the other things that people live through. And so that's really the ideal way of doing it, and I wish it was simpler than that, but it's not easy.
Okay, Blake, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.